We are right in the middle of making our parkour game called Storror Parkour Pro, and today we're in the Thamesmead estate in southeast London to do some research for our level design. The housing society that built this in the 60s is basically wanting to knock it down to the floor, totally demolish the whole thing. Rather than repair it and refurbish it and make it better for the people who live here, they basically want to rebuild luxury fucking developments that they then sell to like foreign investors basically, and like kick out all the people who actually grew up and lived here. But it's under the guise of kind of like, you're better off starting again and having new buildings. But it's like all the stuff that people build nowadays is just shit. You know, all these incredible estates and spots that are so incredible for parkour and pretty much where the sport came from in the outskirts of Paris. Like, they are being knocked down. It's kind of that constant battle between us wanting to use these spaces for, you know, what can be seen as like a really productive kind of healthy sport for young people to do.
Go across, all the way.
And then big property developers trying to ruin them and make money out of the same shit. So I was like, hold on, why are we inventing a narrative for the game from scratch? Why don't we just use real life? And essentially that story just was so obvious. So that's kind of then become the story that the level design and like the concept for this version of the game, like what it's based around, is that dynamic between doing parkour in some incredible housing estate, but then there's this massive property development company who's trying to knock it down. And so the missions and the story kind of unfold in like trying to save the estate basically. In real life, these places are getting demolished and knocked down, but if we can kind of make digital copies of them and kind of do justice to the vibe and the feeling and the scale and the style of architecture, then it's like a homage to them.
Yeah.
They live on in the game world, yeah.
The
It's
dying
so sick.
architecture. It is a shame. Probably been through over 20 different estates. Probably more just like riding through, but actually looking at like a good maybe 10 of them deeply. And yeah, this is the last big one on the list. The old style of like Haygate, Thamesmead was one of them as well, that has heaps of walkways connecting these large towers. They're considered bigger eyesores, so they're now disappearing. So this is, yeah, one of the last of the important ones for us to see.
I think that's the big difference. Like, those sort of new developments don't have the funding to invest in like public or shared spaces, which is so often what makes the good extra walkways and like the
100%.
weird angles. And it's just not good spots. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Most of these estates were built in the same period in the 50s, 60s, 70s, mainly the 60s, all basically by the same like social housing department of the Greater London Council. Basically they were obsessed with this kind of communal architecture. And so that's why there's no more of it happening, because kind of politically, social housing, obviously like the funding for it has been restricted and restricted and restricted. So of course they have to build like cheap shit because they just don't have the same money that they did in the 60s. There's something about the design philosophy of Brutalism that, I mean, it literally did give birth to the idea of parkour. And so of course, going back to those kind of spaces, it's like, it's always good for parkour.
Absolutely. I mean, look at this. This is like a perfect example of the
so sick.
of the like utopian dream. Like, we've got the roads beneath us, all the walkways built up on top of that to try and separate the public foot traffic and make this feel like a safe space. So this locks us off from the roads. And we go, like, this is nuts. Like constant dropaways and the big bridges going over the top, all the repeated crazy structures because they had the ability to mix concrete and metal, you know, and brick. And it just produces like structures that are better than anywhere else. And it is super similar, like France, Paris, they have some of the craziest examples like still around because everything is getting knocked down.
Because you get all these raised walkways and like you're constantly kind of funneling people about. When you have extra walls, that's where parkour becomes really obvious. And to be honest, like the reason why it's controversial is because a lot of it didn't work in the way they expected it to. And actually when you have these raised walkways, it creates a lot of spaces for seedy shit to happen and people to hide and like
unsocial behaviour.
There is a problem with it, but I think, I don't know, just the way it looks, it gives an impression. It feels different from the kind of buildings that get built now.
Absolutely. I mean, look at this. Look at the amount of space that's been dedicated to the community that lives here. Super interesting as well because they cage it all off, and then there's no ball game signs everywhere. It is like a failed dream. The brutalist housing estates.
You can't help but thinking there's an element of it of like, get rid of the estates because it represents a certain kind of working class demographic lifestyle that people don't like. And
absolutely.
Like, such a core element of parkour is about being out on the street. Like these kind of estates are the most kind of real.
They're the realest.
You know what I mean? There's no other way of putting it.
I mean, this is so good. Even here, like, I haven't been jumping much, but like this makes me want to jump. It's aesthetically pleasing in like a gritty way.
The level design, the architecture of our game is such an important aspect, and I think leaning on this style of design is perfect for it.
Yeah, and it's important for us to understand like the rules that we can play to, like the rules of the architecture of housing estates and how we can use that to our advantage, and because they're so good inherently. Just about understanding what those components are that we can replicate the best way. Like you're gonna send all of this stuff. There's a pipe, there's a windowsill, there's a gap in the concrete balcony, then there's another pipe, and then there's, you know, a big jump to the top. Now you're on the roof. But that's the crazy thing about these spaces. When you build something that is so outlandish, it feels wrong.
It's that detail that makes it really. That makes it feel like it's lived in, and that there's people there and there's stories. It's like somebody obviously had a late night piss there. That hasn't been fucking redone for years.
If it's all like perfectly made in this fake world, then it just feels so sterile, and that's not what it is. It's not a sterile.
The opposite of sterile.
Yeah. Like part of the problem was that they weren't built well.
Yeah.
And so they've got like these bad build-ups of moisture and like mold. Like I mean, even under here, like water's been hitting that for years. It's not been maintained. Also where it falls down, there's just, they haven't been maintained. So what would they be like if they had been maintained?
Yeah,
they could be really, you could gentrify this grass mound, you know, you could open up sections of it. Oh, and you can just see through things. This is what we want. So we don't have this in Australia, for context.
So in the early access there'll be 3 levels. One of them is a brutalist council estate. The second is like a construction site, basically like an old estate that's already been demolished and is starting to turn into new flats. And then the third final boss level is the skyscraper, basically, which is like the corporate complex where Grayscape are like fictional antagonists, developer company, and more or less the missions kind of lead you to a place where you're going to do some kind of activist protest type stuff. So it's not just all council estates, it's council estates, construction site, and this skyscraper corporate complex.
The fact that we're building everything modularly now so that we can mix and match things is both good for the reality of a council estate, the reality of skyscrapers with balconies and repeated textures and all that. And it's also super easy for us to then go back in and change things. So that's also been a process, just making sure everything that we make can be changed.
It's like a blessing and a curse. You have an opportunity to design specifically for like routes and channels and ways of moving, and to like move the player in a certain direction around the level. But then does that kind of take away another kind of core part of what the sport is, which is discovering your own challenge and like finding stuff and using it in a way where it wasn't originally designed to be like that. To be honest, most of the people who are going to be playing this game are probably totally new to actually doing it in any way, even though it's virtual. So we kind of have to cater the level design for both those types of players.
If we just make a good estate, inherently it's good for parkour. So if we then layer on top of that those good paths, those active elements, gamified kind of spaces.
Like Sam's basically putting blocks in, playing it, seeing how it feels, like seeing what options it creates, and then adding another block or changing the last one, and kind of, you know, we're using the similar-ish footprints, but kind of adding this like game flow to it, and then turning that block out into something that feels brutalist or like fits the right style and aesthetic, and then the artists kind of take that, do their modeling and texturing, and turn it into something that looks realistic. So that's kind of like the pipeline that we've ended up with.
We're going to have some buildings interacting with the water, and then it's going to be next to a construction site. So it'll look like this. But definitely having water challenges, and we'll probably have a little bit more things like this out there in the water, props that you can jump to, whatever that is. Yeah, I don't know what that is, so that's why I said that thing. You know, yeah, within the bounds of reality.